Oh, well, hello, Donelle. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this re-recording of the webinar that we had issues with the audio. So for everybody that will be watching this, this is a re-recording of the Laudato Si Focus on Environmental Justice Part 2 that we had on February 22nd. And Danelle Wilkins is joining us today. Danelle is the founding director and CEO of the Green Door Initiative in Detroit, Michigan, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes environmental justice. She has dedicated her life's work towards improving the quality of life of Detroiters and others through environmental and social justice. She serves as the Detroit City Council's appointee to the Detroit Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, served on EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and served as Governor Granholm's appointee to the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. She's played a key role in developing Michigan's environmental justice policy, launching the city's first green jobs training program, advocated for citizen involvement in public policies, citizen science, and contributed to many scholarly articles on environmental justice and public health. Thank you, Donelle, for being here, and I will go ahead and set up the slide so that you can get started, and just let me know when I need to forward.
Thank you so much, Paz, for re-inviting me, having me come back to do this recording. I'm really sorry that it had to be done this way again, but I'm happy to be a part of the effort, and hopefully I can do as good a job as I did when it was done live. And I just want to thank the Catholic Climate Covenant for inviting me to participate on this wonderful panel. It's my life's work, and I enjoy talking about the work of achieving or attempting to achieve environmental justice for the sake of people who have been disproportionately burdened by environmental problems. So yes, just like you said, I am from Detroit, born and raised. I believe that my work is required of God. I am a person of faith. We have much in common. I am a born-again Christian, and I like to share that, particularly with folks who are in covenant with God to address problems that he finds important, such as creation and the people, his creation, his children. So yes, I'm with the Green Door Initiative. We work to restore hope in the people while we provide help to the planet. Next slide, please. So the mission of the Green Door Initiative, which is headquartered in the city of Detroit, it works to ensure that everyone is environmentally literate, capable of practicing and promoting a sustainable lifestyle. And really is regardless of where people live, their zip code, their income, and more importantly, their race. Thank you. Next slide. So I want to start here just so that so that we all can be on the same page when it comes to the environment, the environmental justice movement, and how we see it. It goes a little bit beyond what most people consider when they're addressing the regular environmental world, the natural world. So the environmental justice movement has defined this as our environment, where we live, where we work, where we play, pray, where we learn. It is both the physical and the natural world. Thank you. Next slide. I like to always start my presentations acknowledging someone who I never had the pleasure of meeting in person, but I learned about him later he passed away. This is Xavier Joe, who's 10 years old. And Xavier caught my attention because there was a news report featuring him and the conditions surrounding his death. He actually ran into the house one nice fall day and told his mom he could not breathe. And she called 911. She, in the process of waiting for 911, she sought to find someone who could help get her son to the hospital because she did not have access to her own automobile, which is not unusual in Detroit, given that we place the world on wheels. In some places in the city of Detroit, more than 2/3 of the residents do not have access to their very own transportation, personal transportation, and often have difficulty even accessing reliable public transportation. But that aside, Xavier and his mom went outside to wait for the emergency technicians, and ultimately he just passed away in her arms. He could not breathe. He died because he had asthma. Now, the story on the news was really about 911 didn't get there in time. And I agree that was a horrible situation. But for me, it was even more disturbing because here was another child that died because he could not breathe. This is a preventable disease, asthma is. We know a lot about it. And I just like to mention Xavier anytime I make a presentation, because he's one of the reasons that keeps me focused and keeps me going until we can achieve equal protection under the law when it comes to environmental protection. Next slide, please. So another sort of incident that keeps me focused is the Flint water crises. As many of you know, the problem became a public issue when it was discovered that there was decisions made to remove the city of Flint from a reliable water source. And when that decision was made by the government, the state, the local government, and ultimately in support of even the federal government, it exposed thousands of families and residents to water that wasn't fit to consume nor use. You can hit that again. We also know that more than 12,000 children were poisoned as a result of that. And do understand that because lead was one of the major contaminants in the water, that children under 6 years old are extremely vulnerable to the impacts of lead poisoning. And if you don't know much about lead, let me say this, that it is really very difficult to fight off or fend off the impacts of lead if one does not have access to healthy food. And Flint is one of the communities that's considered a food desert. And that makes the problem of exposure to that particular poison especially critical. Next slide, please. I just want to share a little bit about what happens in the city of Detroit and why I actually am doing the work that I do. For those who know Detroit, know that we place the world on wheels, like I mentioned earlier. We had the most famous automobile inventor, Henry Ford, who had a vision that all things automobiles should be located near each other. So if you needed iron, steel, petrochemicals, rubber, and other ingredients, that one should be able to easily access those raw materials so that the manufacturing process could actually take place and that automobile can roll off. Hit it one more time for me. So in the city of Detroit, we clearly could be considered one of the most polluted cities in the country because of this. And for those who followed the automobile industry back in the 1980s, the joke was the last one out of Michigan turned off the lights because the industry had moved away from its early days of doing most of its production in places like Detroit and in the country, and we even went beyond. And so when they left our community, the city, they left a lot of contamination. So much so that the entire city was designated what is known as a brownfield site. Now, brownfields are contaminated or perceived to be contaminated properties. And hit that one more time for me. Back in the 1990s, the federal government created a policy and program to address these complicated properties in places like Detroit, in Rust Belt communities, in manufacturing hubs. And because these properties seem to hinder economic development for the most part, seem to hinder opportunities to reinvent communities like Detroit. So like any other city, our mayor at that time decided that we should go after these kind of resources to clean up these contaminated sites and begin to create an inventory. He knew it was bad, but he didn't know it was this bad. They stopped counting at 40,000 sites and actually estimated there's more like 65,000 contaminated sites inside the city of Detroit alone. So the likelihood that someone could live next to, on top of, work near, attend school or worship by some type of hotspot is very, very real, very high. Hit that one more time. So what limits the ability to really invigorate this kind of cleanup, of course, is always resources or the lack thereof. To date, that number, 250 parcels of within the city has been cleaned up. Now there's just a little bit more than that. I would say closer to 300 properties have been cleaned up, but nearly not enough to make a dent in the issue. What drives the cleanup? There are a number of reasons that the policy was set up. Number one reason was to address any health implications as a result of the contamination on the property. So the more impacted the property is by pollutants that can really create some real health problems, the more the priorities to clean those properties up are real. And then there is what really drives cleanup is economic development. And there's been a lot of sort of concerns that most of that cleanup actually takes place in areas where gentrification is really, really big, downtown Detroit, Midtown, New Center area, and areas where there is likely to attract new kinds of residents to the city. And some of the other places don't get the kind of attention it needs. And this is why environmental justice is key. Next, hit the next one for me. So in Detroit, it is a primarily people of color populated city. More than 80% of the residents happen to be African American. About 10% Latinx, and then the rest others. So we understand that the environmental justice movement has been mainly a movement for justice for people of color and for the poor. But race is the number one factor for the location of contaminated the location of polluting facilities. And while the decisions back in the day when Henry Ford was planning out what needed to occur in his goals to build an automobile, he wasn't necessarily thinking, oh yeah, let's make sure that Black people get poisoned. I'm not saying that, but the least expensive, the most undesirable land uses are often places where African Americans and other people of color are identified or selected to live near. There are covenants that have been revealed in city records to show that when it was legal to segregate, the segregation patterns, if you will, Dr. Barb Bullock calls it residential apartheid, but housing discrimination patterns were okay to do back then, and it's no surprise that those properties surround people that line up with what those covenants were back in the day, those land use covenants about where Black people would live and other people. So the city of Detroit is also located in the county of Wayne. The county of Wayne is the most diverse county in the state of Michigan, and anything outside of that county, I'll show you another map, you will see the differences between where facilities are located. Next slide, please. So this is that slide I spoke about. So West Bloomfield Hills is a very well-known community suburb of Detroit, north of Detroit. It's most affluent, primarily Caucasian community. There, if you look closely at that particular map, you may see a few green dots there. But for every dot, these are considered to be historic toxic releases. And so the other map that says Detroit gives you a clear idea of the disparate impact and the inequity in terms of who is bearing the greatest burden of the economic engine and pollution in our community. And these kind of maps can be done everywhere across this country, and you can be assured that you can make the connection to who lives where the most pollution exists. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is an example. This is Marathon Oil. Detroit is one of the few places outside of the Gulf Coast of the country that actually contributes to the production of petrochemicals. This particular company, it sits right in the middle of a densely populated community of African Americans, Latinx, new immigrants who are where English is the second language, if you will. This is a very highly contaminated place where people are not only exposed to what you see there, but their freeways, the I-75 corridor, they live in the shadow of that. They live in the shadow of the wastewater treatment facility. They live in the shadow of several other industries that produce steel and iron, and just a pretty nasty place to live. And I did say densely populated, so these are people who have owned homes. They work every day, and they also have to breathe what comes out of these facilities. Next slide, please. So who's likely to get asthma? Because I really need to emphasize the work of the environmental justice movement for us in Detroit is really all about health. And that's pretty much the reason for most of the work that is done across this country. I would also say internationally, it's about health. And so for communities like Detroit, asthma is a huge issue. And I am of the belief that no child should not be able to breathe clean air and to drink safe water, to attend school buildings where asthma triggers are not occurring. This is likely the biggest problem for places like Detroit. The children between the ages of 5 and 14, they're considered the urban poor. They're likely to live at or below the poverty level. And so no surprise to most. Next slide, please. just wanted to give you an idea, 18% of the Detroit population has asthma. It is the third most common cause of preventable hospitalizations, and it's the leading cause for children in the city. Hospitalization for children is 3 times the rate of the state of Michigan. So it's a pretty concerning problem in our community. And in fact, the state of Michigan has created several initiatives to try to figure out what can be done to reduce the incidence of asthma in our city. Thank you. Next slide. Asthma is not the only issue. I mentioned lead when we saw the slide around Flint. The lead is also a prominent issue in the city of Detroit as well. The elevated lead levels for children 0 to 5 has been pretty bad. This is another map of the city, and you can see where the hot spots are. So the darker the area, that's the area where Marathon Oil and other the facilities I described are, which sort of makes the case or the point that you will see, children who may be also poisoned by lead. Now, lots of people like to say, well, if, they're eating lead-based paint chips or something like that. That kind of issue has been looked at and actually has been determined that beyond the normal ways children might likely become lead poisoned, there are some other reasons. So next slide, please. This is an example. For every dot on this Detroit map, there's a lead poisoned child. So we know that certain manufacturing processes can emit a number of chemicals that are harmful to our human bodies. In addition to manufacturing, issues of incineration, burning of trash. Detroit, until a year and a half ago, was the home to the largest municipal waste to incineration facility in the country, some say even the world. It was built to accommodate a lot more households' trash beyond the city of Detroit. So we received all the trash from the suburbs to burn in the city of Detroit. And sometimes burning beyond trash, people would throw pretty much anything into their garbage cans that ultimately end up in the incinerator before it ends up in a landfill. So if you're burning batteries and batteries contain lead, that's a likelihood. In conversations with consultants who focus on environmental cleanup and remediation, I'm told that you can assume every corner in the city of Detroit is host to an underground storage tank that used to contain gasoline and likely to have contained leaded gasoline. Many of the neighborhoods where people live are, they abut freeways and highways, and there are mobile sources, trucks and others that may emit lead, or when leaded gasoline was utilized. If you remember your chemistry days, lead is a heavy metal. Lead, when emitted into the atmosphere, doesn't travel very far because it's a heavy metal, so it deposits nearby. The places that are likely to be a place where someone lives or attends school. And so if a child is out on a playground, in their backyard, front yards, they may encounter exposure to lead. So there are a number of reasons why a child may be lead poisoned in the city of Detroit. This particular map was done by the Detroit Free Press through an investigative report. they were able to identify a huge source of lead poisoning, potentially through these lead smeltering facilities that would take the batteries from automobiles and other types of batteries. And smeltering really is burning, smashing and burning these particular items, and whatever was emitted out into the atmosphere often landed on the front yards and backyards of people who lived nearby these facilities. These were vacant properties, vacant facilities for decades. These are what we call the Brownfield sites, an example of the Brownfield sites. So this is one of those revelations that really shocked a number of residents. Unfortunately, it didn't shock the federal government, EPA, the County of Wayne Health Department, and others knew that this was a problem and was aware of the problem from the 1950s to the 1980s when they shut the facility down. Ultimately, the facility, some of the facilities that got shut down at that time, I'm sorry, and actually had through the reporting process and investigative strategies of the Detroit Free Press, they uncovered a number of health studies and other kinds of reports that really revealed that the government was fully aware, and these lives did not matter because no one was removed from harm's way, no cleanups took place until this particular effort revealed that and shamed all the agencies. So back in the 2003, I believe they began the process, EPA and others, to clean up something that they knew about for decades. Next slide, please. Hit that again. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. While we are committed to restoring hope to a people, the people who are carrying the greatest burdens, and we are providing help to the planet by one, providing capacity, support, information, whatever we can, advocacy to ensure that our voices are heard at every level of government, and also that our voices are heard even by our neighbors and others that care about the quality of life of everyone. Thank you so much for letting me share this slide presentation again.
Thank you, Donelle. And I must say, listening at this time, I got so much more than the other time when I was dealing with some of the audio issues. But I want to go back here to the map, if I could, because it's striking. The one thing that struck me is that little area in the middle, Highland Park, and I can't read the other one.
Hamtramck.
I'm going to assume that that's the area you were talking that was gentrified.
No, actually, let me say this. The study was done for Detroit only. The Highland Park and Hamtramck are two separate municipalities. Very unusual. They sit in the middle of the city, but they also have their own historical issues. But because the Free Press was just looking at the city of Detroit, they did not enter any data around those.
Because when I saw this, I was like, wow, okay. But the other thing that strikes me is I think we need to humanize each dot. Each dot is a child. It is a life. And it is a life that is impacted for the rest of their lives. Because lead poisoning is not something that you just get rid of it and you're fine. There's usually impacts in education, which then impacts that child's future. And that I want to sort of go like, wow.
Well, let me say that the future really is very crucial here, because not only that child's future, but that child's community's future. So, for example, you are likely, I've been telling this to people around the Flint crises in lead poisoning, that I would not be surprised if a prison wasn't going to be built sometime in the future near those children and near that community. Just like in Detroit, the one of the hot spots for the lead smelter is near a relatively new prison, Ryan facility. Ryan facility was created because the policy wonks were pretty much saying, look, we need to just create a facility to make sure that the neighborhood or the municipality where these prisoners come from, that they can be right in their own city, if you will. So yeah, let's place it near the place where it's likely that these children were lead poisoned. There's a lot of research that really shows the link between lead poisoning and criminal life, violent life. I mean, at some point it's been shared that, like Rome was destroyed because of lead. It used lead almost in every aspect of society. It is a very, very dangerous toxicant that can really impact the neurological system. And as you indicated, their ability to learn, it interferes with what academic potential they may have been born with. But once they've been lead poisoned, then that potential is driven down. And so folks who understand this issue, who don't really care that that was a child poison or whatever, they think about the future and say, well, look, let's make sure we plan for a prison. And that's unconscionable.
And that's still part of the whole justice equation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you did say that 65,000 brownfields and about 300 cleaned up. Is there a proposal to speed up cleanups? Is there any, are we stuck at that number?
So that's why I'm at the Detroit Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. In my early days, Green Door Initiative was not the first environmental justice organization that I helped to found or co-found. Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice is where I cut my teeth on environmental justice. I was the founding director of that. And under that, under my tenure there, one of our priorities was to ensure that a voice like ours was represented on any decision-making bodies that decided what to do with the resources for cleanup and to help in some way guide those resources. So I fought to do that and was successful and became the city council's appointee. So every time there's a new group of city council members, they've been really gracious to reappoint me to that. But the concern I have, like, okay, so Danelle, you've been there for all these years and only 300 or so have been cleaned up. What's the problem? Well, the problem is there are like 8 other members to the council that are typically the mayor's appointees. And he decides to place business leaders and others on that body who have some economic interests, city employees who have some economic priorities. And so my voice, while it is a strong one, oftentimes is overshadowed by that. But I make noise when I need to, especially when there's talk to invest in a polluting facility and invite a polluting facility to come to our community or expand a permit, and we be expected to help them, continue to do what they do. No, then it's time to energize the community to fight for the body to make a different kind of decision. And I've won some. We've won some in that process, but it's a huge issue. It is a very huge issue.
It is. And I guess I'll segment to the last question. Within all these areas, and also within that other neighborhood that you showed, there are local churches, congregations, parishes. What could the faith community, both in Detroit and surrounding community as well as nationally. What response, how can the faith community respond to this?
I want to begin by one, acknowledging the church, because the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice did a very important study that they released in the early days, even prior to the more formal environmental justice movement, in response to a community and a member of their one of their congregations, who came to them and said, look, there's a problem. We're tired of being the dumping ground for the state of North Carolina. They're bringing PCBs to our community. It was more than 90% African-American community, and every landfill was located in this community. And they did a civic disobedient kind of effort, laid down before these trucks carrying hazardous materials, were willing to go to jail, and many of them did, to stop it. That wasn't enough. And they went to the United Church of Christ, and the United Church of Christ responded. And it was because of their response, I get emotional thinking of this, because of their response, it put the environmental justice on the movement and on the agenda of every policymaker, from the federal government to the more local government. Environmental justice is a household phrase right now. Everyone, including this current administration, has acknowledged that it exists. It is an issue, right? So if the church could do that at the beginning of this movement that created this movement, it can continue to do that. It has to join forces and recognize that God is the creator of all things. All things. He owns the earth and the fullness thereof. He cares about creation. He wants us to care about creation the way he does. And he wants us to care about the least of things. And we know that we cannot even hide from the atrocities of racism and injustice and whatever. It's been in our face. COVID has put the world on pause. And when it put the world on pause, it revealed a lot of ugly things in our country. So anywhere that you are, there are people who are in the shadows that you may not have ever paid attention to, that are struggling with issues that I shared with you today. There is some organization, and if there isn't, your congregation can create one about environmental justice and seek out, even surround, if it's in an urban community or a very poor community somewhere, and join forces with folks, find out what's going on and make it a reality. You can make it a reality. You have the power to make the reality manifest that we deserve, and that's that every human being can expect to breathe clean air, not be decided on because of the color of their skin, because who decided when they were born how they were going to come into and enter into this earthly realm? The only one who did was God. And he tells us to love our neighbors. So show your love in that way, in action. Love is action. It's a decision. And we would welcome you anywhere. You can open up spaces in your church buildings when we are able to, for meeting spaces, for community convening, for hearings on a permit or something. You can support through, always money is needed, resources. It costs to create strategies and media and other things to get the kind of attention that this issue deserves. To be able to create spaces so that children's immune systems can be boosted with quality food. You're likely, if you happen to be Caucasian, you probably have 6, 7 options near where you live to purchase good quality food. There are people like Xavier Joe, whose mom may have had to depend on public transit to get to somewhere where she can buy an apple and a good, piece of vegetable or whatever. These are real issues and we need you. We cannot fight this fight alone.
Yes, thank you. And I will say that we owe huge thanks to Reverend Ben Chavis and Charles
Yes,
Lee for their
absolutely.
writing of that report, because it really did focus and shine the light on this issue. And I want to thank you again for being here today. And I do hope that as folks are listening and watching this presentation, they will make connections both locally in their own communities and reach out to you to see how they can maybe of help to you as well.
Absolutely.
But my thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you for having me. Have a
Thanks. And
wonderful day.
let's keep in touch.
Let's do. I'm
Yes.
excited to be connected
Thank you.
as well now.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of here.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try to close it. Don't worry.